On this episode, we're going to be talking about getting into Necromunda in 2023 and beyond. Hey there, Scabby Scummers and Gangers, Crimson Oracle here with another episode of Dome Runners TV. Today we are going to be going back to basics and talking about the very foundation of how you get into Necromunda. This is a really common question I see online in the Reddit community and on Facebook. People wondering, what do I need to start playing? What books do I need? What is the deal with this game? What does it take to start? Because they look online and they see a ton of books and various things that you can't really tell what is what and what you need just from kind of glancing at it. And it's not as simple as picking up a codex for your gang or your army in Warhammer 40k, where it's all under the same tab in the Warhammer website. Instead, you go to the Necromunda page and there's just a ton of stuff. So I'm going to break it down for you, and we're going to, you're going to leave this video knowing exactly what it takes to start playing Necromunda. And I will link to a bunch of other videos that I've done that cover, the kind of basics.
If you like our content, don't forget to like and subscribe. And for as little as $2 a month, you can become a patron and help support the show.
Okay, so first things first. Why play Necromunda? Necromunda is a fantastic game. It is a lot like Warhammer in its mechanics, but it is Warhammer with all the added depth that you might want out of something like a role-playing game. Necromunda is a little bit closer to D&D than it is traditional 40k. You are going to choose your fighters, you're going to create names for them, you're going to kind of imagine their story, and then you are going to watch them, fight their way through and take territory and kind of see them grow and take injuries and wind up getting killed potentially, or, advancing to become, a important member of the gang. And there's something very rewarding about that kind of play. The game is not focused on competitive tournament-style gameplay. You are mostly going to be playing campaigns when you play Necromunda, because that's where all of the sort of the fun and the juicy stuff comes in. You get to try new weapons and new equipment and advance your fighters so they become better, all of that, and it really, really makes a difference. This game is one where you are going to set people on fire and watch them run screaming off of buildings. You are going to be able to knock people off of buildings. You are going to be able to potentially drag people with harpoons. This is a game that is very focused on, kind of creating that nitty-gritty that you don't really get in the more, mainstream tabletop games that Games Workshop puts out. Stuff like Kill Team and 40k, you don't really have stuff like your models actually duck behind cover, for example. So overall, it's a very different game that's based on the exact same kind of bones. The core stats are very similar to 40k. The way things work is overall, very kind of grounded in the Warhammer system, but it is that plus more, and I think it makes all the difference. So I obviously have been a big fan of Necromunda for a long time. Getting people to play Necromunda requires sometimes a little bit of, just giving them experience with it. So if you are interested in recruiting your friends, we're going to talk about that. And if you are, new and someone is recruiting you, you're in the right place. So let's move on. What does it take to get started? Okay, so there's a few different ways to get into Necromunda. It's a little bit complicated right now because we're in a little bit of a weird situation. We have a rule book that came out just a few months ago that is not in either of the 2 starter sets. So Necromunda has 2 starter sets. One is called Hive War. It's in the like $160 range, I think. It comes with 2 gangs and a bunch of terrain, plus all of the dice, tokens, and cards that you might need to play. It's a decent enough deal. It was a much better deal a few years ago before they started really cranking up the prices. It unfortunately does not come with the current rulebook. It comes with a sort of shortened version of the old rulebook, which means that it's missing stuff like a campaign, and it doesn't have all of the kind of extra detail and stuff, and it has different missions. So it's essentially, if you buy the starter set, you are buying it for the models, but you can play with it, at least for a while. In fact, it even has basic rules for the 6 house gangs, all 6. So if you, for example, are part of a group, that is interested in playing Necromunda and you want to just kind of have the minimum entry, then buying Hive War would allow you and everyone in the group to start gangs, and have the basic rules for everyone to start playing for a relatively low entry point. You would only have one rule book, obviously, and it's not the current rules, but the current rule book and the old rule book are very similar. It's a weird thing where it's kind of like the new rule book incorporated all of the most popular house rules, basically, and made a few small adjustments, and included a bunch of stuff that is useful for players, stuff like trading post, and all the skills and stuff and everything all listed in there. So it's a different rule set, and I think it can be a little bit confusing to start with one and switch over to the other. But the good thing is that the old rules were perfectly fine for all of us to play with for 5 years, 6 years. So it's really not a big deal to learn to play with the other rules, because at core they're very similar. There's just a few kind of adjustments between the two. So, it's not a bad starting point, but I understand not wanting to kind of invest in all of that. So if you don't want to purchase Hive War, there is 2 other options. One is to start with the larger starter set, Ash Waste. It has a bit of a different kind of setting. The campaign in it is kind of hardcore. I generally speaking recommend playing Ash Waste once you have a bit more experience with the game and you're ready for the worst obstacles that the game has, because the weather conditions and the campaign itself are very punishing in the Ash Waste. So you may find yourself with an ever diminishing crew playing that campaign. So I don't necessarily recommend that as a starting point. If you are really gung-ho to play Orlocks or Ash Waste Nomads, if the setting really appeals to you, it's not a bad way to start the game, especially because you can generally find it for pretty affordable prices on eBay and such. Check your local store, see if they've got any copies on discount, because it's a older starter set now. It's been out for over a year, and those things tend to get bulk bought and then sold at lower prices by the various entities selling things online. So that is a starting point. It's not one I recommend. The other option, and the one that is easiest and least expensive, is to purchase the rulebook and the rules for your faction. So it's expensive rulebook if you buy the hardcover. It's like $70. It is a beautiful book. It's thick. I mean, when you actually get your hands on it, it's like it's like a Bible. It's so large, and that's just like the core rules and all of the the kind of weapons and all of the weapon traits and all of the equipment and all of that. It adds up, and that's a big book in and of itself. But the good news is that you don't have to spend $70 on it. You can actually spend $35 and get it as an EPUB, which you can purchase from, iTunes or Black Library or anywhere really. It's a good way to start the game. Then you just need your faction rules, which the faction rules break down to each book has a different set of faction rules in it. So for people playing Goliath and Slave Ogren, that is House of Chains. For people playing Escher, that is House of Blades. For people playing Orlok, that is House of Iron. For people playing Cawdor or Redemptionist, that's House of Faith. People playing Van Saar, House of Artifice. People playing Delac, House of Shadow. People playing Venators, Book of Peril. People playing Enforcers, that's the Book of Judgment. People playing Genestealer cults or Chaos cults, that is the Book of Ruin. And then for Outcasts, it's the Book of the Outcast. And for the Ironhead Squats and Ashwaste Nomads, it's Book of the Outlands. So with your faction book and the core rule book, you get all of the rules for all the weapons in the trading post, all of the equipment and gear in the trading post. You get all of your house weapons and equipment, all of the skills, all of the tactics cards. The basic tactics cards are printed in the rule book, and the faction-specific tactics cards are printed in your book. And that's all you need technically to start playing, other than models and a play surface. So that is, of course, complicated by the fact that, yes, it's a dice game. So you're going to need some D6. You also are going to need a scatter die, as there are a bunch of weapons that use those. The scatter die is something that's very easy to track down. It's been part of Warhammer since the 80s, I think, which means that there are about a zillion of them floating around. So any dice that you buy, just check and see if they have a scatter die in it, and you should be good to go. There are some special dice in the box. They're injury dice and they're ammo dice. And these are both D6s that you can replace with a chart. In fact, I have a PDF linked in the show notes that has everything that you need for converting dice. And there are, of course, vehicle dice in the Ash Waste box. If you are going to be playing with vehicles, you will need either to use those, or you will need to use a chart, and again, those conversions are on that same PDF. Now, there are also tokens and cards. The tactics cards that come in the starter sets, you can actually use the tactics card chart that's in your book, and you can just roll on that or pick from that, or you can use the one that's in the rule book for more generic gangs. That's totally fine. There are options. Someone on Yak Tribe made a wonderful printable version of the tactics cards that are sized to fit inside of magic card sleeves. So you could print out the cards that you want, and you can sleeve them with magic cards, and then boom, you've got a card deck of the tactics cards that you're looking for. So that is also a good starting point for that. Tokens. There are a bunch of tokens that come with the box sets, and they're useful, but personally, what I recommend is going to Yak Tribe's under Hive tools. You can actually input your gang into Yak Tribe, and from there you can print fighter cards for all of your fighters, which then you have paper fighter cards, which means in place of tokens, you can just write different status changes with a pencil on your card, and that'll allow you to keep track of stuff without having to, choose which starter set to buy. Or you could also, of course, buy tokens online, and I've included links to a couple different token sets that will work, that are from various Etsy stores. So that is the bare bones, and of course then you need somewhere to play. So that is one of the more complicated topics, because what you play on influences a lot about how the game plays. If you have existing wargaming terrain, you can use that, but you will probably need to add a lot of obstacles and scatter terrain and stuff, because Necromunda depends heavily on line of sight blocking terrain in order to make the matchups more fair when you're dealing with shooty versus close combat gangs. So I highly recommend. Personally, I have a whole video series on scratch building various terrain from recycling that's in your recycling bin. You can also get some wonderful MDF terrain, or you could, you could buy plastic, which is the more expensive route. But there are, there are lovely plastic sets out there that are well worth your money. But not everybody is wanting to dump $1,000 into a game board to start a new game. So I recommend starting simple. Go raid your recycling bin, pull out all the various things that you can use. You can turn cardboard into buildings. You can turn cans and bottles into various pieces of industrial equipment that are lying around. And when you put it all together, you can get a really wonderful board for a very minimal investment. Necromunda is played on a variety of surfaces. Hive War comes with a 2x2 board mat that is the minimum size, I would say, for playing. You could also use a Kill Team board, which is 22x30. Those work great. And I have a whole video about terrain and all of that I will link to right up here. Okay, so that gives us a basic rundown of what you need to start playing. For you and a friend, you need one copy of the rulebook and a copy of each of your gang rules. There are some gang rules that are available for free online on the Games Workshop website. I believe the Genestealer cults and the Hellic cults, which can be downloaded. These are older versions of the rules from before the Book of Ruin, but they are almost identical to the rules in the Book of Ruin. So they're a good starting point if you don't want to immediately go out and spend a bunch of money on your rule books. So if you get just the Necromunda rulebook and you download those two those two free rule sets, which I've linked to in the description below, you can get a game going for just for like $35 and models that you have lying around if you've already got a collection of minis. You can proxy stuff if need be. If you're trying to get a feel for the game, I really recommend not outlaying too much money at once. So for like a $35 EPUB, you could be playing Necromunda, ASAP. If you were up for using a little bit older gang rules and proxying models. And it kind of goes up from there. You can spend absurd amounts of money on this game if you decide to try to collect everything. I don't recommend that. It is really just for the hardcore players, so the people who are going to do that already know that they're going to do it, and for the rest of you, seriously, you do not need to buy all of the books. In fact, I strongly recommend against starting out with all of the books, because while Necromunda is deep and fun and there's tons and tons of different ways to play it, it's also a complicated rule set when you start layering in lots of other stuff. So starting simple is a really, really good idea, which is also a case for starting with Hive War. It's got basic rules for 6 gangs, and it's got a basic set of rules for playing the game, and it's a good way to kind of get started before you kind of dive into playing a full campaign. So you've got options. It's not ideal. I'm really frustrated by the fact that there isn't a starter set that has the current rulebook in it. I don't understand. This is the second time this has happened. For years, GW sold the 2017 starter set under Hive while also selling the 2018 rulebook, which was a very different updated version of the rules. And I just, what can you do? Games Workshop is at times frustrating. I will say that there are, from what I've heard, there are ways to access rules in kind of a compendium format online. I don't have the ability to kind of direct you to that kind of stuff, but if you find it, that is a way to sort of test out the game without buying anything at all. But I don't recommend skipping out on your house books completely, because the amount of background and cool information that is in those books is well worth the cost, especially because the EPUBs in this game are actually decently discounted. The EPUB version is between $18 to $35 cheaper than the actual paper rule books, which means that you're saving a ton of money if you go digital for this, and you have the ability to search, which is really, really nice. Because let me tell you, searching through a rulebook for something specific can be a bit of a pain. There are also some really lovely rulebook tabs, which a friend of the show has put out so that you could organize your models. So I link to the... Okay, so we have gone over the basics. We've talked about, playing with, just some rule books and what it takes to kind of start playing. Now I do want to go over, kind of what each of the books has to offer. So each of the various house books has special missions, and it has rules for 3 different types of alliances. So you have a guild alliance, which is the various organizations that keep the infrastructure of the hive running. You have a outlaw alliance, which are the various criminal organizations that your gang can make an alliance with if you decide to be an outlaw. And there are, of course, noble alliances, which is the various noble houses which can hire gangs to work for them as well. Now, each one comes in a different book. I've got a chart here listed, and all of this is also in the PDF that I have in the show description. This is a useful bit of information. You don't need to start out playing with allies, but when you eventually decide to mess with them, they are a little bit complicated. They have a little bit of quirks about whether it's super beneficial to play with them. I have a whole podcast episode about the various guilds, so I link to that again in the description. That kind of goes over all of the the guilds. I got one on the illegal alliances and on the noble alliances. And that will give you, a grounding in how to play with those. They're not necessary. A lot of people don't use them, but they can be a lot of fun to sort of mix things up. And they're a chance to kit bash stuff or, buy some lovely but a little bit expensive Forge World models. Next up, we've got the Book of Peril. So in the Book of Peril, you have a ton of resources for playing in a bad zone, which is the sort of weird, quirky environment that is full of either, plants that are carnivorous or various pitfalls. The air isn't breathable. A lot of the effects that got added into the Ash Waste table are things that are in the Book of Peril. There's a bunch of missions that are focused around going into bad zones, and overall, I really think it's a great expansion, especially as like a first expansion, to try to kind of add more to your games. Next up, we have the Book of Judgment, and this actually has a whole separate campaign called the Law and Misrule campaign. And that campaign is a blast. It is very credits heavy. You're going to make a ton of credits playing that campaign. So, it's definitely one I wouldn't start with, but it is a great kind of sequel once you've played through the Dominion campaign a few times. Picking up Book of Judgment and getting access to all that stuff is great. There's a bunch of scenarios in there that have to do with that. The Book of Ruin is full of dramatis personae that are, kind of evil or sinister. It also has a tool set for making monsters and various things that might stalk your gangs and kind of chase them around and fight them. This is a cool book, but it does not have the Uprising campaign in it, which is the one knock against it. It has a bunch of alternate versions of rules for the Uprising campaign, but the Uprising campaign is only in the Dark Uprising rulebook that came with the box set Dark Uprising. And if I'm being honest, that's bullshit. I mean, it's very frustrating how certain things in this game will just sort of disappear. From tactics cards to dice to the fact that one of the campaigns is just completely gone and you can't purchase it. Now, if you were to track down rules for the Uprising campaign through some other means, or pick up the Dark Uprising rulebook off of eBay, it is a fantastic campaign. I can't recommend it enough. It kind of is not a good starting point. Again, it's very violent. You're eating people. It gets rough. So if you're not up for kind of watching all of your characters die, the Uprising campaign, maybe not the campaign to start with. Next up, we have Book of the Outcast. Book of the Outcast, in addition to having the Outcast gang in it, also has the Outlands campaign. And this is a confusing naming scheme because there's also a book called Book of the Outlands that does not have a campaign in it. So the Outlands campaign is about your gang building settlements. I actually think it's a really cool starter campaign. So if you are looking for a different campaign from the Dominion campaign to get started, I strongly recommend the Outcast campaign. It's also a really fun excuse to kit bash a bunch of terrain. I personally have built a tile or tiles representing each and every one of the pieces of infrastructure, except for there's one that's a chasm. I don't really know how to model a chasm. So other than that, I've got a lot of fun use out of this book. So Book of the Outcast has that. It also has scenarios and all that to go with that. Finally, we have Book of the Outlands. In addition to having the Ironhead squats and nomads in it, it also has all of the vehicle rules that you need to play in the Ash Wastes. And that's actually mostly what's in there. It does not have a campaign because, once again, the Ash Wastes campaign is in the Ash Wastes starter set only. Because the suits at GW really like locking stuff behind large purchases, and it kind of drives me crazy, but that is what it is. Last but not least, we have the 3 Aranthian Succession books, which are a set of campaigns that are very narrative focused, telling the story of the fall of Necromunda to a large scale attempted seizing of power. And each one contains a campaign. It includes expansions for gangs, stuff like Dramatis Personae, and the vehicles and mounts that are specific to a bunch of the gangs. They are, I feel like this is stuff that you do not need to start out with at all. These campaigns are very complicated, and they often involve lots of character models that you might not have, and so I wouldn't be rushing out to start with any of the Aranthian Succession books unless you were really gung-ho to play like Cawdor in the Ash Waste and you need the rules for that. Then go right ahead, but just looking out for your own sanity, you don't need any unnecessary books. There are also a ton of additional rules which you can find in various White Dwarf articles and in these articles on Warhammer Community called Apocrypha Necromunda, which give you a ton of expansion. So that is an overview of everything that you need to start playing. You probably have additional questions. For example, what gang should I play? I've got a video that you can go to that will give you a great rundown of all the gangs, other than I think it's missing Ash Waste Nomads and Ironhead Squats. Other than that, it's got all the different gangs, and it goes over kind of what you might want to play and kind of why you might want to play them. Additionally, you might be interested in starting a battlefield, starting making terrain. I've got a great video that goes over getting started with Necromunda terrain that kind of gives you an intro on that. So know this, you've chosen well. Necromunda is a great game. It is, in some ways, it can be the last game. It's a game that's flexible enough that you can build rules for whatever factions you want to play. You can use it to play a whole other systems, and I personally think that it's one of the best rule sets around. I've found very few games that match it in terms of a combination of both fun and that sort of tabletop accessibility and beautiful models and all that stuff. So Necromunda is, as I call it, the game of games. It's a wargamer's war game. It's the best, but it does take a little bit of work to get started. So now that you're ready, off you go. May the dice be ever in your favor. Thanks as always to Carl Casey at Whitebat Audio for the show's music. And of course, thank you to my patrons. You all make everything that I do here possible. I couldn't afford the software I use to edit this stuff on without you. And of course, if you would like to help support the show, you can head over to patreon.com. For as little as $2 a month, you can help keep us on the air. And finally, of course, don't forget to check out the Dome Runners podcast on Buzzsprout, iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast from. Of course, everybody out there, please stay safe, and don't forget to change your paint water.